Islamic fundamentalists to try and topple the moderate governments of Algeria and Egypt. In Spain, ETA, an organization dedicated to the creation of an independent Basque state in the northwest of the country, has been at war with the Madrid government for several years. Northern Ireland has witnessed one of the longest-running terrorist campaigns. Indeed, it can be said to have begun with the partition of Ireland in 1921. Another and more recent form of terrorism has been that pursued by the drugs barons of Central and South America, especially in Colombia. This is designed to warn governments to stop interfering with their operations. Increasingly, too, mainstream terrorist groups are using drug trafficking to finance their activities. In the multi-ethnic Balkans, Yugoslav strongman Josip Tito had evolved a policy of decentralization, whereby the country had become a confederation of 8 small states. When he died in 1980, cracks soon began to appear. In 1987, Slobodan Milosevic came to power in Serbia, the largest Yugoslav state. He was bent on bringing power back to the center, with Serbia being dominant. This was resented by states with a non-Serbian majority population. Elections held in 1990 reflected this, and in 1991, these states declared their independence. The Serbian minority in Slovenia objected, as did that in Croatia. Violence quickly erupted. The Federal Yugoslav Army was sent in, and open warfare became widespread. The European community managed to broker a ceasefire in Slovenia, but were unsuccessful in Croatia, where the bombardment of the ancient port of Dubrovnik was heavy and prolonged. The UN imposed an arms embargo on the whole of former Yugoslavia and began to send in soldiers wearing blue berets. Their role was the now traditional one of peacekeeping, but this soon changed to assisting humanitarian aid to get through to beleaguered communities. It was in Bosnia-Herzegovina that the situation became most desperate. Here, Muslims were in a majority, but there was a strong Serb minority and a smaller Croatian one. A three-sided civil war developed. During the fighting, a new term came into the language: ethnic cleansing. Intimidation and wholesale murder were used to drive minority groups out of certain regions. This created an ever-swelling flood of refugees, stretching the UN's humanitarian efforts to breaking point. The Serbians laid siege to the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo. The city was subjected to prolonged artillery bombardment. The slender UN forces were unable to stop this or the continuing ethnic cleansing. Persistent efforts were made to broker a peace among the warring parties, especially by American Cyrus Vance and Britain's Lord Owen. All were in vain. Likewise, UN-arranged local ceasefires usually collapsed within hours. The UN tried to create safe havens, especially for the Muslim communities under siege, but this often increased intransigence and hindered the humanitarian effort. Perhaps mindful of the fact that similar ethnic Balkan rivalries had helped to precipitate the Great War of 1914-18, the UN forces in former Yugoslavia continued their struggle to contain and halt the fighting.
The century of warfare now continues here on World Conflict. Hi, Mary Beth Coit here for the Handy Stitch, the sewing solution for today that makes sewing fun, fast, and easy. The Handy Stitch uses the latest micro technology and actually fits in the palm of your hand. It does the jobs that conventional sewing machines can't, so you can sew anything, anywhere, at any time. It has the precision of a small machine to repair delicate fabrics like silk, yet has the power of a big machine to sew through tough fabrics like denim. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, the Handy Stitch is for you. You can even do repairs while wearing your clothes. Repair a pocket without taking your pants off. Fix a fallen hem in the office in no time. Even use it for patching up outdoors. It's quick around corners and can add a decorative touch to all sorts of fabrics. You would never be able to sew draperies with a regular machine. The Handy Stitch is a portable sewing solution that makes life a little easier. It lets you put the professional touch on your home decorations and will pay for itself over and over. It gives you that genuine chain stitch, which means you get a secure, strong, and even stitch every time. It's battery powered or AC adaptable, so you can sew any fabric, anywhere, anytime. Because of its compact size, it travels with you. The Handy Stitch can even be used outside to repair a flag or fix an awning. Regular machines are bulky and can cost over $500. Call now and you'll get the Handy Stitch complete with 4-threaded extra wide metal spools, the needle threader, and an extra spool pin for regular size thread. A $40 value for just $14.99. But call in the next 5 minutes and we'll also include this giant 64-piece thread and bobbin collection, so you'll always have the right colored thread for any job. A $20 value, yours free. That means you get everything. The Handy Stitch, all the accessories, and the 64-piece thread and bobbin collection, an incredible $60 value, all for just $14.99. So call this number right now. Here's how to order.
To order Handy Stitch, call 1-800-409-0606. That's 1-800-409-0606. So call 1-800-409-0606 and order today.
I was born in Cuba in 1914. I'm proud of being Cuban because we have a very rich history, fighting for liberty and independence.
Well, before the revolution, life was good for people that had money. But there were a great amount of persons that have no money. And the situations for those persons was a nightmare.
I think the revolution signaled a sort of a new beginning to a lot of people, and it was very charismatic revolution. It was sort of portrayed in almost romantic terms. And my family was taken by it, and they thought that there was going to be a real significant change for the better. After a while, the revolution took a turn and it showed another face. I'm immediately reminded of the accomplishments that the revolution has brought to the Cuban people, mainly through education and healthcare. Well, there's also another side, which is what has been lost through this same process. Deep down, what we want is to have a part of Cuba that's alive within our memories, to come back to us, to be returned to us. We've come to realize the importance to have things that are beyond the necessities, beyond the basics, to aspire to things. And I think we want Cuba to sort of have that ability as well. And for us to be able to go there and be a part of it more than we have been in the last 20, 30 years.
Gotta go right now. Gotta go.
Got those strong, sudden urges to go and go? Well, then you may be one of 17 million people with what's called overactive bladder.
I have to go now.
And you should go to your phone to learn what you can do about it, because overactive bladder is treatable.
Gotta go.
So call 1-866-901-0400. We'll send you free, confidential information. You'll learn about overactive bladder, like what causes those strong, sudden urges, and why it's not normal at any age. You'll get tips to help you go less often, and find out about a proven treatment option. Plus, get questions you really should ask your doctor.
You need a break? Not right now.
Remember, for millions of people, overactive bladder can be treated.
And I don't have to go right now.
So call toll-free 1-866-901-0400 or visit our website today. Come on, get on with your life.
The century of warfare will continue in a moment here on World Conflict.
There is increasing pressure on the UN to add peacemaking to its roles. And here in Angola, it tried to end a long-running civil war by supervising democratic elections in the early 1990s. Unfortunately, conflict quickly resumed. The other way of peacemaking is to use UN troops to prise the warring sides apart. The problem is the danger that they will turn on the UN. Large numbers of UN troops would therefore be required, and with powerful enough weapons to match those of the adversaries. There is a real doubt in the post-Cold War era whether UN member states would have the will to do this. Nevertheless, the mid-1990s did see encouraging progress in two trouble-torn regions. 2 years of sometimes secret negotiations saw the Israelis begin to relinquish their hold on the Arab territories which they had occupied since 1967. It gave Yasser Arafat's Palestinians some control over their destiny. South Africa's transition from apartheid to a truly multiracial society saw much violence, especially between the Zulu Inkatha movement and its rival African National Congress. Yet South Africa's first truly multiracial elections went ahead in May 1994 without significant violence, to the surprise of many, and Nelson Mandela was installed as the country's first black president. But the UN, in its role of global policeman, continues to have to try and prevent conflict. The crises which it is likely to face in the immediate future are as varied as ever. The 20th century has seen the world change in dramatic fashion. Events around the globe can now be seen on television as they unfold. This not only gives the media increasing influence over governments, but also makes people increasingly aware of how horrific war is. This may be one way in which violence can be reduced in the future. But meanwhile, the potential for future conflict remains. Some of the century's worst wars have been provoked by dictators like Hitler. This breed of ruler still exists, and their love of power often leads them into aggression against both their own peoples and neighboring countries. One of the major causes of the long and bloody struggle of 1914-18 was ethnic and nationalist rivalries. As the century draws to a close, there is a renewed sense of ethnic and national identity, especially in Eastern Europe and among the states of the former Soviet Empire. This too, as we have seen, has led to armed conflict, and more is possible in the future. That traditional cause of wars, religion, can still inflame passions. The 20th century has been largely dominated by great ideologies, notably communism and fascism, whose mutual conflict has provoked war. Ideology still remains a force, though a lesser one since the end of the Cold War. The map of Europe has changed several times during the century. As the new democracies of the East struggle to adjust to changing conditions, they can take comfort in the fact that no two Western-style democracies have ever gone to war with one another during this century. These states, together with Russia and other former Soviet republics, are drawing closer to Western Europe and North America. Indeed, 1994 saw many former Warsaw Pact countries being granted associate status within their former enemy, NATO, and playing a larger part in the role of the UN. Another encouraging sign is the effort being made to control arms levels through the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, CSCE. But the reduction of armed strength in the industrialized world has thrown up large numbers of surplus weapons, some of which find their way to third world countries, who see strong armed forces as a means of increasing their international standing. Arms-producing nations remain keen to sell weaponry abroad for economic and political reasons. The greatest fear, though, is that nuclear, chemical and biological weapons will get into the hands of power-hungry dictatorial regimes, especially from the huge former Soviet stockpiles. While non-proliferation treaties have been signed to halt the spread of these most terrible of all weapons, a number of non-signatory countries are suspected of having a nuclear capability, or to be developing one. Thus, the threat of these forms of warfare, potentially the most destructive of all, continue to exist. But the dramatic advances in communications that have taken place during this century make it more possible to identify covert weapons programs. This century has also seen conventional weaponry make ever more dramatic strides in its sophistication. Indeed, the current state of the art was hardly dreamt of in 1950, let alone 1900. Yet strip away the sophisticated technological veneer which covers much of today's world, and it will be seen that the causes of modern wars are still the same as they ever were. The greatest irony is that so often modern high-tech weaponry is powerless to prevent and halt these wars. Furthermore, many of the weapons being used in them have a technology which is nearer that of 1900 than the year 2000. Given the numerous wars, both large and small, and other forms of armed conflict that have beset the 20th century, it would seem that humankind has still not found the means to control its natural aggression. Yet, as we approach the next millennium, recent progress in drawing old adversaries together does hold some hope for the future. As yet unborn generations may come to look back on the last 100 years as the watershed in the history of our planet. If so, the century of warfare will not have been in vain.
The 20th century, 100 years of human history, saw many wars and conflicts. The way they've been fought and the weapons and technologies used have changed and evolved over the years. History International presents The Century of Warfare, beginning now on World Conflict. The post-1945 world lived for 45 years in fear of another global conflict.
this time primarily fought with nuclear weapons.